I discovered a way to make virtually every meta ad you make a winner. You don't need to spend thousands on agencies. You don't need to be a creative genius. You don't even need AI. All you need to be able to do is count to the number two. Here's what I mean. So, first, what is a losing or a low performing ad? Okay. The way I define it is it's an ad where it costs you more money to make and fulfill your product than it does to acquire a customer at profit and at scale. So here's a box of stuff. Let's say after all costs that go into making and fulfilling this box of stuff, you make a $20 contribution margin or a $20 profit. Okay. A low performing ad would be when you have, say, you run meta ads and you're spending $30 CAC. So you make a $20 profit after everything without the advertising. Then you run meta ads and you're spending $30 to acquire a customer. In other words, you're losing $10 per sale. That is what I consider to be a low performing or a losing ad. It has nothing to do with click-through rates, CPCs, CPMs, or any other metric you can possibly think of or even find in the meta ads manager. All it means is that you're losing money instead of making money. This then leads to the biggest mistake 99% of newbies make when it comes to meta ads. You're selling a box of stuff again, right? It's costing you $50 CAC. So what does the average person new to meta ads do? They're like, okay, they see the $50 CAC. I need to get it down to $30. No, you should not do that. Here's the reason why. Meta is all based on a marketplace. It's all based on competition. Basically, if a lot of people are spending ads on Meta in a particular category, like say supplements or shoes, like you're selling shoes and you get Nike and Reebok and all these big companies spending money on advertising for that category, your ad costs are going to go up little by little, or it could be something to do with inventory. Basically, long story short, ads are based on a marketplace cost. What that means for you is that if you're spending $50 to acquire a customer, that's how much it costs, essentially. Yeah, in real life, it might be $40, it might be $60, but let's say on average it's $50. That's just the cost of that category. And getting it to $30 is not even realistic. Or even if you do it, even if you do make an ad that gets at $30, it's not going to get you enough volume to even be worth the issue. Instead, what you should try to do is to lower your break-even ROAS by manipulating the offer, the product, and the costs that all go behind selling and fulfilling your stuff. Okay, so for example, let's say you're selling a perfume bottle. Okay, that perfume costs $100 retail. That's how much you're charging. Okay, and then also we have after everything, after shipping labels, pick and pack fees, and all that kind of good stuff, you're left with a $50 contribution margin or a $50 profit. And let's say you're running ads and you get a $50 CAC. That is what's called a 2x ROAS, which is actually Meta's average ROAS across the entire platform. When you consider all the billion-dollar companies and all the small businesses and all the different categories in and out of e-commerce and everything, their average ROAS across the platform is 2x. That means if you want to break even, you need to be able to have an offer or a product that can at least survive that, a 2x ROAS. Now, what a lot of people, again, look at this and they say, okay, let me get that $50 CAC and let me get that down to $40 CAC. The problem, again, with that is you're not going to, it's super hard, right? Because if it's $50, it's $50, just how much the competition is dictating how much the CAC costs, but also you're not going to be able to sell to as nearly as many people as you would want to, because you're trying to do Meta essentially. So what you want to do instead is, if you have a $100 perfume bottle you're selling for $100, you want a $60 contribution margin. Again, this is relating to COGS, shipping labels, pick and pack fees, and all the good stuff. And then as you're running ads, you still have a $50 CAC. Now, in this situation, what you're left with is a 1.6x ROAS. In other words, even though Meta's average is a 2x ROAS, you can survive and grow with less. And if you can survive and grow with less, the better off you are. In fact, the lower you can get this number, this 1.6, if you can get it to 1.5, 1.4, 1.2, you're better off. Now, there's a realistic ROAS target you want depending on the different categories. For some categories it's higher, for some categories is lower. For example, a lot of supplement brands that are purely subscription, some of them, the really big ones, can get it all the way down to like 0.5. That's not realistic for most people, but if you're at a 2x, it is probably realistic depending on your category to get it down to 1.8, 1.7, 1.6. It depends on what you're selling. But this is what you're actually trying to go after instead of just lowering your CAC. So with all that said, here are the 5 ways to lower your break-even ROAS so that you can actually get your ROAS lower than 2x. Okay. First things first, pricing. The great thing about pricing is that it is the fastest, simplest, and most straightforward way to improve your contribution margin, your profit. If you charge $100 for a perfume bottle and you start charge $110 and nothing else changes, congratulations, you're more profitable. That's great. Now, it's not 100% perfect. You want to split test it, but pricing is the main and one of the first ways you should look into improving your stuff. Number 2 is bundling. Very similar to pricing, but in e-commerce, what bundling does is actually one of the best ways to make money in e-commerce, because the more stuff you put into your box, the cheaper it ends up, not cheaper, but more profitable it ends up being. 2 things happens when you're bundling. One is that you're increasing your AOV, your average order value. So instead of one perfume bottle for $100, I can sell 2 perfume bottles for $100, or even in a discount, 20% off, $80 per perfume bottle. 2 perfume bottles is still $160, right? A higher AOV. And with shipping, usually when you're working with 3PLs, usually the first price that they give you to make an order, like the first perfume bottle, is like $2 or whatever. Then the second bottle you add in there is only 40 cents. All of a sudden, that's extra profit that you're making there. And basically, you end up being more profitable with bundles. Okay. Now, number 3 is subscriptions. Subscriptions are really interesting. It's not great for every category, but in some categories, it is super great, right? So with a subscription, what it allows you to do is that we're assuming that people who are on a subscription, which is usually the case, they stay for longer than people who are not on subscription. In other words, if I'm selling a protein powder, someone who's on, say, a subscription will probably give me more money at the end of the day after a year than someone who buys a bundle, for example, of protein powder. They might only buy 3 protein powders from me if I sold them a 3-pack, but if I got them on a subscription, they might stay for a whole year. And what that allows me to do is that I can then say, okay, I don't need to make money on the first sale. I don't even need to make money on the second sale. I can wait up to 3 months to break even. And now all of a sudden, if I have a $20 contribution margin, for example, normally on the first month, and then on the second month, that's 40, on 3 months, that's 60. Now I don't need to have nearly as high of a ROAS, of a good ROAS, to be profitable. And subscriptions is actually one of the best ways to do this online with meta advertising. You have to be careful because you are going to be losing money if you go this route, but it is extremely powerful if you can get it right. Number 4 is economies of scale. And what I mean by economies of scale, I just mean that you probably have a lot of SKUs out there. You want to reduce the SKUs and order more of the same color, same flavor, same whatever, so that you can spend less per unit. For example, if you're in apparel, you sell 5 different colors of a t-shirt. Instead of selling 5 different colors, maybe you decide to say, okay, you know what, of these 5 colors, 2 of them sell really well, so I'm only going to sell these 2 colors. And because of that, now it costs you a little bit less per shirt, because you're spending more in total, right? Instead of 1,000 units in 5 colors, you're spending 5,000 units in 2 colors, for example. That will reduce your cost per shirt than if you actually went with all different colors. Number 4 is reducing your COGS in general. Reducing COGS literally just means, like, maybe you decide to go back to your product, go back to the drawing board and see, hey, is there anything in this product that I just don't need that I added in, but it just wasn't that important? For example, a really common one in e-commerce is luxury packaging. With luxury packaging, people want great packaging because it feels nice and it ups the experience and everything. But most people, especially in functional categories, most customers, they don't actually care about the packaging. I run a candle brand, and it doesn't come in a box. It comes in regular bubble wrap, right? And that saves me $1.50 per order. And that allows me to be profitable with advertising. Maybe there's something similar with you. It could be the packaging. It could be a certain type of feature that you added in there that doesn't really need to be in there. It could be maybe you replace instead of using a high-end ingredient or a high-end material, you choose a cheaper one. There's a lot of things you go into it. I highly suggest you look into whatever you can do. And even if all it does is reduces 50 cents or whatever, it's probably worth doing. Okay. And last but not least, this is the hardest one. This is one that people don't really want to do, but it is an option. And it is actually pretty important, is just sell something else, switching categories, right? Maybe, for example, a really hard business to sell stuff online with paid advertising is food and beverage. Like, say you sell ice cream. Ice cream is extremely difficult to sell online. I'm not telling you to stop selling ice cream. In that situation, what I would do is like, hey, do wholesale ice cream, but launch a new product specifically so you could do well with advertising on Meta. So it is, and it is probably the biggest way to double, triple your results, because it's essentially a whole new bet. Okay, but it's also the most difficult.